Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning on such a beautiful morning. My name is Joanne Sheehan, and I work in the Climate Unit in Enterprise Ireland. This is the last in a series of webinars focusing on our new Climate Enterprise Action Fund supports and how they can help your business. And today we're focusing on the ICT and services sectors. As I'm sure you're all aware, the government has made clear our national commitment to achieve a 51% reduction in emissions by 2030 and to have a net zero carbon economy by 2050. For many businesses, this will mean very challenging times ahead. The Climate Enterprise Action Fund supports are there to help companies start, accelerate, and get the support they need to take action now. So before we begin, just to mention, we have a chat box in the corner. So if you have any questions throughout, please put them in and we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if we can go to the first slide, please, I'll briefly outline today's agenda. So we have two incredible keynote speakers this morning, Yvonne Holmes, Chief Sustainability Officer at AIB, and Andrea Carroll, Senior Sustainability Project for EMEA in Amazon Web Services. Following that, we're going to have a panel discussion with some client companies who have experience with our green supports. Laura Costello, the Strategy Director, Purpose and Planet for Think House, the youth marketing company, is joining us, as well as Aina Glynn, Group Accountant and Head of Sustainability for BidX1, and Brian Minahan, Account Director and Sustainability Programme Lead for Ergo. After that, my colleague Kathleen O'Regan is going to go through the Climate Action Funding supports, and when she's done, we'll bring the panelists back on and have a Q&A. So let's begin. Yvonne, I'll ask you to put on your camera and your microphone. And if you could start and talk us through AIB's sustainability journey to date, that would be absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joanne. So yeah, I'm going to talk about AIB's sustainability strategy and the journey of where we're at and where we're going to. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So just in terms of the broader sustainability strategy, we have three pillars: climate action, economic and social inclusion, and future-proof bank. So I'm going to focus in on climate action today, but just, I suppose, reflecting the other areas. We have set ambitious targets. So if I look at climate action, we had a 5 billion green lending target to 2023, so averaging about $1 billion a year in green lending. And towards the end of last year, we set ambitious targets around net zero in our own operations by 2030, but also that we'd have 70% of our new lending to be green or transition lending by 2030, and then to be net zero in our Scope 3 customer portfolio lending emissions by 2040, with the exception of agri, which is aligned to 2050. So there's other targets there listed. I'm not going to go into those, so we might just flick onto the next slide and I'll talk about those targets in a little more detail. So we've set out the ambition to be a sustainability leader, and that's a very authentic ambition. And just some of the areas to call out. So the net zero targets and ambition, last year we had 1.5 billion of green lending in 2020, and that accounted for 16% of our new lending. So 16% last year, and we're trying to get to 70% by 2030. So that's a big ambition for the bank in terms of the ratio of green and transition lending to other lending. We have issued 2 green bonds at this stage, and we've signed up to a number of voluntary disclosures around the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and the Principles for Responsible Banking. And basically they require more kind of enhanced disclosures in relation to how you're managing risks and opportunities, climate risks and opportunities. On the social side, there's some examples there. I won't go into them. And on the governance side, relating to the climate objective, you know, we've mandatory ESG training at employee level, and obviously have a number of sessions held with board and executive level. Just the other thing to call out we published our excluded lending activities list. So what are the things we won't lend for going forward, and they're available externally. And on the bottom there, just the 3 areas in green. So the Carbon Disclosures Project CDP rating, we've been A rated for the last 5 years, and that's really important to us in terms of our own emissions and what we're doing to address those. What you have, you don't hold. So that's a continuous, strive to kind of increase the bar. On the right-hand side, ESG ratings. So like credit rating agencies, there's ESG ratings, and we have come from, I suppose, a journey to achieve leadership rating on a number of those that we're focusing on. So if we move on to the next slide, people often wonder why banking, what kind of role banking can play, because, we're not manufacturing products in terms of the physical sense, but actually banks are recognized as having a critical role, because if you think about it from an AIB perspective, we've 62 billion in lending on our balance sheet. So, and new lending, 12 billion every year in and around. So where the lending goes it's like the financial oxygen for change. What gets financed and what's getting financed in that green space. So if we flick on to the next slide, so we have been working hard to provide propositions to our customers to help them transition. So you'll see there we have a green mortgage, which offers a preferential rate for customers who have an energy rating of A or B. We've a green personal loan where customers, if they want to retrofit their home or undertake energy efficiency measures, again at a preferential rate. We've a partnership with Nissan around a 0% finance on the Nissan Leaf and a free smart charger in conjunction with Electric Ireland. On the right-hand side, on the corporate side, we do a huge amount in the project finance space and have a team of specialists funding renewable energy projects and infrastructure. And sustainability-linked loans are for companies who want to commit to ESG targets. And if they achieve those targets, predefined targets, they'll get better terms in terms of their lending. And that's becoming more and more popular. And it's really kind of encouraging from a bank perspective, corporates on their own journey. And I mentioned about the green bond, and then we've a socially responsible investment portfolio. On the right-hand side, I touched on some of the commitments, and we've signed up to a number more, like the Low Carbon Pledge and Net Zero Banking Alliance, around disclosing science-based targets and reporting progress on those over the period. And we've signed up for the stakeholder capitalism metrics. But what all of these are trying to achieve, I suppose, and why we've signed up to them is it's to hold ourselves to account. It's to say we're committed to this. We will absolutely provide the disclosures as set out in these, and look to continually push and strive and do the max that we can do. So if we flick on to the next slide, so I just included this because to me, I suppose when I came to sustainability, it touches off every part of the organization. And I suppose I pulled this together to try and just show how the pieces knit together. So in the center, having a clear strategy and ambition is absolutely fundamental. And from an AIB perspective, when our CEO came in, he put sustainable communities as the 5th pillar of our strategy, which means that every decision, every investment planning discussion is all looked at through the lens of how is it progressing our sustainable communities agenda. And in the other part in the center is our own footprint, because if we weren't doing what we needed to do in terms of reducing our own footprint, then everything else really, I suppose, falls short. So they're two in the center as core pieces that have to be in place. The other piece then is targets and metrics, because if you don't have clear agreed ambition and targets from board and CEO level that cascades throughout the organization and externally, then it's very hard to coalesce everyone around achieving those, and they're not going to appear in where they need to appear from a financial planning perspective and performance measurement perspective. I've talked about the proposition side, so obviously we are supporting our customers is core to what we're trying to do, so having those propositions there, and we've more to build out. And then the risk management is understanding, you know, how climate change and environmental change and the broader ESG agenda, how that might impact our business, and how are we measuring and monitoring that. And I'm going to talk to a couple of examples of that in a minute. But wrapped around that are skills and training, and, you know, I suppose there's different skills and training required across the different functions, you know, whether it's the energy and environment, whether it's procurement, whether it's the portfolio management, risk, you know, proposition design. There's a lot of new skills required, even reporting and disclosures. So that's a big focus area. Having employees engaged and able to participate and provide input into the whole movement is really important. And actually, we've just asked employees for them to pledge what they're going to do individually for progressing the whole sustainability agenda, and that's got a lot of traction. On the data and system side, data is quoted as the biggest challenge around you know, making progress on the sustainability agenda, and it's regardless of organization type. And then the governance, being able to show how you're measuring progress, whether it's on the targets or oversight of the risks or capitalizing on the opportunities, that is really important to be stitched in terms of the leadership governance. And the four pieces on the outside are what I describe as what somebody sees looking in. So what information and supports are we providing to our customers? What partnerships do we have in place? Because if you don't have partnerships, you can't create the movement that's required. And we have a number of partnerships in place between Food Cloud, Task, you know, these third level institutions, where we're looking to come together and make progress on the broader agenda. And then external communications and how we're engaging with stakeholders, and also our disclosures in terms of, you know, our annual report and our sustainability report, which we publish annually and have done since 2016 in terms of a dedicated sustainability report. So just my last piece is just going to talk a little bit on the risk management side. So if we flick to the next slide, this is just to kind of give a flavor for how we're embedding it within our organization. And we've done a lot in terms of launching responsible supplier standards and other policies that we have in place, and the excluded lending activities list. So in terms of the current focus, just some examples, you know, we have a clear ambition around green and transition lending, but that has to be underpinned by saying, well, what are we classifying as green or transition? So we have a sustainable lending framework that has just been developed that clearly outlines what we're going to categorize under each of those. The sector heat mapping for all organizations, depending on your, you know, your business, it's important to understand where are the risk areas, whether it's from a physical risk perspective or a transition risk. So transition risk being, you know, what's going to be the impact of carbon pricing or policy and regulatory changes or changing consumer preferences. How are they going to come together and impact the various sectors that you serve? And that helps to understand where you need to focus your energy from a risk identification perspective. And the next area is, you know, for us, we have to look at what borrowers are likely to be impacted from a climate perspective, and try and assess their ESG risks. So it's climate plus social and governance considerations. So we have a new questionnaire for customers that are most likely impacted to be able to understand that risk a bit better. And then collateral valuation, it's looking at how does flood risk or the energy rating of our properties impact the value, and how is that going to be impacted going forward. And the final piece is the emission reduction target. So we obviously have clear ambitions set out. We have to set clear targets on an annual basis that are science aligned to say this is what we're aiming to achieve and how we have achieved it or not as we go over the period. So that is a very quick run through. We'll just flick on to the next slide, and it's just to close to say, this is, I suppose, such an important agenda. This line sums it up for me. We're the first generation to know we're destroying the planet and the last that can do anything about it. So it's a great summary. So on that point, I'll hand back to Joanne.
Yvonne, thank you so much. That was so interesting to hear what AIB have done and are planning to do, particularly around the green lending piece, and also that strategy and ambition is just central to everything you're doing. So thank you so much for going through that. Yvonne, if you could turn off your camera and your mic, and Andrea, I'll ask you if you can turn your camera and your microphone on and go through some of the sustainability plans and strategies that Amazon have put in place, and future plans as well. That would be great. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Joanna. Thanks for that really interesting presentation, Yvonne. My name is Andrea Carroll, and I am here from AWS. So AWS is Amazon Web Services. So we're part of the Amazon company, but we operate separately. We're also the biggest computing services, cloud computing services in the world. But I actually hadn't heard about AWS until I came to work for them. So we work under the radar quite a lot. So delighted to be here. If you can flick on to the next slide. Like any other company in the world, we have significant pressures facing us now, particularly coming from sustainability in 2021. It's been, I'm not sure if it's COVID or if it's, I don't know if we're finally getting wise to this, but the pressures are coming from everywhere, which is great to focus the mind on sustainability. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the type of pressures that we feel, similar to everyone else, really. So business pressures from customer within the supply chain, customers and the supply chain. So the companies that we work with, which there's a lot of small companies, I suppose, or companies who might be in the audience today that might be thinking that they would be in the supply chain of AWS or Amazon or similar larger companies. These questions that you're asking are not going unnoticed. We're having these conversations quite regularly. There's obviously significant global accords that we are signatories to, including the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement in the US and globally. Finally, in the US this year and globally, the Climate Pledge, which I'll talk about in a bit. Regional legislation, we are a global company, so we're in all regions globally. And there's legislation coming in at regional level, which affects us. So the EU Green Deal, and we've heard a lot about the EU Fit for 55 in the last week or two. In America, we see the National Climate Task Force recently and the proposal for a new Green Deal. So there is a lot of regional legislation. And then there's local legislations and procurement guidance that's coming. Since the UK left the EU, we've seen a significant change in the legislation there, or procurement guidance that they're offering, with a significant focus on sustainability now. And then picking up on what Yvonne was talking about there, we've seen an evolution in the investor community as well, where ESG is a significant focus for investors. So a requirement for us to focus, like everyone else, on sustainability from all sides. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what AWS is doing, and you'll see in these slides, even since I put these together last week, we've had some changes. It's such a rapidly developing company, and we are constantly working on how we can improve what we're actually doing. So to set the tone for the company, Jeff Bezos and Amazon signed with Global Optimism, which is run by Christiana Figueres, who was one of the architects of the Paris Accord. They announced the Climate Pledge in 2019, which is a commitment to meet the Paris Agreement 10 years early. So Amazon have agreed to that, and AWS are working towards that as well. So as a company, we've guaranteed that we will be net zero carbon across the whole company by 2040. We had an ambitious renewable energy goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030, but we're actually on path to use 100% renewable energy by 2025. We also announced a climate pledge fund to support others and to invest, which I'll talk about in a little bit, in climate friendly innovations of €2 billion. And I also didn't on this slide mention the Right Now Climate Fund, which is a fund of €100 million for nature-based solutions, and the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact as well, which is, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to achieve this? So we have huge goals that we're working towards. Obviously, we are a huge company, so with that comes a lot of responsibility. Renewable energy is key right now to what we can do to reduce our impact. So we are focusing very much on that. We're also in AWS looking at the energy efficiency and optimization of our data centers. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a massive focus for us, and it's somewhere that we have a lot of control to change the buildings and how the buildings actually impact, as well as the hardware and how we structure what we offer. We have a strong focus on water efficiency in all of our regions, and we're working with our supply chain very regularly to reduce embodied emissions and to find where we can reduce what's referred to as scope 3 emissions. We have a lot of innovation in our data center design and construction projects, focusing obviously on net zero carbon, but also looking at other alternatives like 24/7 zero carbon or other alternative low carbon materials. We are constantly revising and setting ambitious targets and reporting on that. And we're supporting environmental innovation through the Climate Pledge Fund, through the Right Now Climate Fund, through the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, which I'll cover later, which is available for free, through the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, and we're also a signatory to the Science Based Targets Initiative. So next slide, please. So very briefly, these are the numbers that I was saying have actually changed. We are the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world. That was announced this year, and we're actually, by 2020, we are run on 65% renewable energy in our buildings globally. So we are very much on path to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2025. These numbers, I won't go into the numbers specifically, but they have all increased. I think we're on 232 global renewable energy projects and down to 10,000 megawatts of total renewable energy capacity in 2020 is what we're reporting. So significant work going on in renewable energy. It's a major issue for us and an area that we want to support. Next slide, please. One of the really interesting things is that moving to the cloud is much more energy efficient than having an enterprise level data center. This is what I suppose cloud computing is about, and this, if you're not interested in this area or it's not close to what you do, it might not make that much sense to you, but we do have a lot of research to show that AWS's infrastructure is much more energy efficient than typical data centers. What we have found is that it's 3.5 times more energy efficient than typical US enterprise data centers, and that if you're using AWS technology, you can perform the same task with an 88% lower carbon footprint. This is from research that was carried out in 2019, and since then we've introduced significant changes again to increase our energy efficiency. So my guess is that that's even lower, but we actually do have similar studies launching this year that were carried out for the Asia Pacific region and also for the European regions, and indicating very positive results as well in this way. So it's a very happy story for us that scale is much more efficient, and the way that we are running our data centers is proving to be more sustainable than other options. Next slide, please. Water is a significant issue, and I suppose we've all been talking about carbon for a long time, but within the data center industry, water is probably the next big sustainability issue that we're facing. At AWS, we're very focused on reducing our water use, and particularly reducing potable water use so that we're not taking treated water. So we do try to recycle water on site where we can, and to reduce the water that's used. As I said, that's potable. We're also looking at evaporative cooling. We've introduced evaporative cooling in many of our data centers. So that uses, in cooler areas or cooler times, that uses air from outside to actually cool the data centers. And only where absolutely necessary do we introduce cooling inside for when it's hot, like today, I suppose, that we might have to use some heat and reduce that by cooling water. One of the things that you regularly hear is that there's an awful lot of waste heat produced by the cooling of water in data centers, and that can contribute to district heating potentially. It's not always an appropriate option, but where it is, it's something that we are actively pursuing, and we launched a district heating system with South Dublin County Council in Tala. I think it was towards the end of last year. It was very recent. It might have even been this year. So really proud of that one, and hoping to see more of that where it makes sense, where a symbiotic relationship exists that makes sense. So next slide, please. So this is the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative that I referred to. So within this, we are effectively identifying, hosting, and deploying key data sets on AWS Cloud. So this might be to do with weather, climate projections, satellite imagery, hydrological data, ocean forecast data. We're trying to make this data as available as possible for free to wide audiences, and partners include NASA, NOAA, the UK Met Office, the Government of Queensland, and the whole emphasis behind this is that we're trying to accelerate climate research by providing data and making data fully available, because as we all know, everybody that's working in this space, that data is the biggest challenge that we have right now, understanding the data that exists and making sure that we have access to the most up-to-date data. Next slide, please. And I referred to the Climate Pledge Fund. So as part of our signing up to the Climate Pledge, we also announced a fund to invest in sustainable technology. This fund is about $2 billion, and we're looking for visionary companies that are going to focus on low carbon innovations. So this is open to sign up to. It opened in 2020. So if you have something that you think we might be interested in, go and have a look at the Climate Pledge Fund. And then next slide, please. The other fund I referred to is the Right Now Climate Fund, and that is specifically for nature-based solutions. So that's to focus on conservation or nature. And the idea is that we're looking for large-scale projects that can hopefully be global scale, but it might not be quite global. It might be regional scale, that can introduce carbon mitigation and can demonstrate immediate action around conserving nature or restoring nature at a local level or a regional level. There's €100 million available right now under that fund for nature-based solutions. I didn't mention previously the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact as well, but just because I know this is the last slide, I want to say that that's something that's very recent. I think it only launched last month, but we've signed up to that pact. It's a European pact, and the idea is that it's a number of data center providers who are working towards being climate neutral by 2030, and there's different parameters that are on that. So next slide, please. Oh, we didn't have the last slide. So best of luck to everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for having me. I hope that was a useful roundup of what AWS is doing. And please do follow any links there. I'm happy to provide any links after this too, if you want more information on what I was talking about.
Andrea, thank you so much. That was really informative. And I suppose the thing that stood out to me there was that tone piece being set at a senior leadership level in relation to signing up to the climate pledge, and then how that trickles down through this enormous organization where Absolutely. You can start to see a real impact happening, and how important that senior leadership piece is. But thank you for going through all of that and for joining us today. So I'll ask you just to turn off your camera and your microphone.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thanks. And Laura, Aina, and Brian, if you could pop on your cameras and pop on your microphones, we'll start the panel discussion. Hi guys. Hi everyone.
Hi everybody.
So today we're so fortunate to have Laura Costello, Strategy Director for Purpose and Planet at ThinkHouse, the youth marketing company, joining us. Aina Glynn, Group Accountant and Head of Sustainability for BidX1, and Brian Minahan, Account Director and Sustainability Program Lead for Ergo. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these are client companies who have all taken part or participated in the green support, so have experience with the green supports that Enterprise Ireland offers. So Laura, I'll start with you. If you could give us a very brief introduction to ThinkHouse and also focusing just on your sustainability journey to date, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. It was great to listen to the journeys of AIB and Amazon Web Services just there as well. Really inspiring. I was taking notes myself as they were going through their plans. So ThinkHouse is a full service digital first marketing company that's powered by youth culture. And we transform and empower organizations and teams by really helping them shift their mindset and adopt new ways of looking at the world through the lens of the next generation. And we have 3 key services, and they span creative, strategy, and the big picture for society and the planet. So these include Fame, so it's world-class creativity powered by youth culture, transformation, helping make brands and organizations relevant for the next generation, and Planet, advising brands and organizations on how to embrace purposeful action and deliver it in a way that benefits people and the planet. So I guess to start just briefly on our sustainability journey, it's to say that obviously looking at the world through the lens of the next generation, you can't not but think about sustainability and where the future is going. So we would have been one of the first companies to get brands on social media in Ireland years back when it was kind of the digital transformation, and now with sustainability we really see it as a have to have as well as something that's really important just for our generation to be involved in. So it's not just about the industry that we're in, but it's about, you know, the time in the world that we're living in. So our sustainability journey has been really accelerated over the last couple of years. We move things quickly, and I guess we're here because of the Green Star program, but we have over the last 3 years really been focusing in on what we're doing with our work, but then also focusing in on what we're doing as an organization ourselves. So sure we'll chat a bit more about all of that as we go on.
Thanks, Laura. Brian, if you could give us just a brief introduction to Ergo and again, focusing a bit more on the sustainability piece, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Joanne. Hi, everybody. So Ergo is a 28 years young IT services company. And I say young because we might have been around for 28 years, but the ICT sector is personified by change, and certainly Ergo has a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, and that comes right from the top. Our core focus is delivering digital transformation, and that is in response to our customers' business needs. From a sustainability perspective, actually our journey started 10 years ago. So when we moved into East Point Business Park, we actually did a carbon baseline back then. So it's quite an old one, but we've grown enormously since then. And I describe it in 2 ways, and Laura touched on some of this. One is from a desire perspective, and the other is from an imperative perspective. So the desire comes from everyone at Ergo, from the CEO right down to our engineering staff, financial staff, HR staff, wanting to do the right thing, so it's people and planet. And then when we start talking about imperative, it's that the market has actually changed. So we're seeing a swing shift in the market, and I'll talk about 18 to 24 months, where our customers are demanding that we show and demonstrate tangible metrics and progress on the sustainability journey. So that's the desire, that's the imperative. Desire has been in our company for a long time, so social impact and giving back to the community has always been there. For example, Make-A-Wish will support their IT. Colosho, we give refurbished laptops and desktops to the students so they can continue to work during the COVID. So both desire and imperative from an Ergo perspective.
Brian, that's great. Thank you. And lastly, Aina, again, if you could give us just a brief introduction to BitX1 and focusing in on your sustainability plans and journey to date, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, so BitX1 is a digital property marketplace. It was originally founded in 2011 as an in-room property auction company. But since 2015, we've been developing an online transaction process for property sales, moving completely online in 2017. And since then, we've brought the model to 4 new countries in the UK, Spain, Cyprus, and South Africa, and grown the company from about 20 people to 120 people and growing still. Sustainability has kind of been baked into the BitX1 process in digitizing and innovating a very traditional transaction process. We believe our model is a much quicker, more transparent, paperless, sustainable model. But we kind of focus on sustainability directly since 2019, doing a carbon assessment with the help of a Green Star grant, going another step and being carbon neutral. And then we kind of use that as a launch pad to develop an in-house sustainability team to take a holistic approach and help the company develop in line with UN sustainability goals.
Excellent. Okay, so let's start on some questions. So Laura, I'm going to go back to you. So you availed, or ThinkHouse availed of a Green Start to carry out an organisational environmental footprint. Can you give us a little bit more information around that project and what you did with the Green Start and what exactly that meant?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as I said, we would have worked on campaigns for clients for like over the past 10 years, things like Ben & Jerry's Climate College. And then a couple of years ago, around 2019, 2018, we really started looking at our own footprint and what we were doing for ourselves. And we began talking about becoming a B Corp, and that's something that we're still ongoing and doing our B Corp impact assessment. And then also looking at our own footprint as a company. And so the Green Start grant was all about really starting off to assess our own footprint. It was our really beginning of the science bit for our own company, and looking at what the direct impact our organization was having. So our own impact rather than our client activity, first and foremost. So it was about collecting metrics. And again, like a lot of us today have talked about data. So it was really about getting to grips with that data piece and that science piece, and looking at, you know, staff travel, office consumables, waste, everything like that. And at the end, what we got was the tons of carbon that our organization had created in that year in 2019. So it really was a benchmark for us, like a starting point to identify areas of opportunity, identify where we can look at making reductions, and then setting targets from there, and creating a process then ourselves from that experience to be able to measure it on an ongoing basis, and keep tabs on everything. So that was what the Green Start helped us to do.
And that's exactly what it's there for. It's that start, jumping off piece and helping companies to plan and set some targets, set some ambitions, but to start the process. And that's so much, I suppose, of what this today is to kind of communicate to people is, you know, if you haven't started, start. That's what the climate action voucher is for, and that's what Green Start is for. So it sounds like you did exactly what it's about. Aina, similarly, you did a Green Start. And I'd just be interested to hear what your experience was with it also.
Yeah, I think I would echo that as well. It was a great place to start. When we started looking at, you know, we believed we were a sustainable company, but we didn't really have, you know, the metrics and the data to back that up. And seeing the Green Start and having that as kind of the pathway to get the metrics and to get the kind of information as to what we had, it kind of enabled us to quantify what we have done to date. It kind of reassured us that we had made some good decisions, but then it also kind of gave us a benchmark of like, now we have a target, and when there's a target in the business, we can minimize it, we can work towards it. And it also was a great, the Green Start and also Enterprise Ireland helped us find advisors and find the pathway for where we were going to go, and connecting with the advisors was a great part because they've helped us develop our carbon strategy. So it's not just internally developed, it kind of, we get the right advisors to help us kind of grow that business as well.
Okay. And Brian, are you more at the beginning of that journey piece, that sustainability piece? I mean, have there been specific challenges that you've encountered as you're kind of starting out?
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, I mentioned we did our first carbon footprint 10 years ago. But last year we embarked on an office refurbishment, and then of course COVID hit. But we were also seeing this shift in the market where our clients, as part of tender responses, were asking for credentials. So they marked us on credentials in terms of responses to tenders, and that's government level, private clients across all sectors. So the challenges we saw in that, first of all, we've done a number of things. We've defined our policy early in 2020 and metrics, and that's signed off at CEO level. That's 1 year, 5 year, and then goals for 2030. Aina mentioned the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we've actually lined up to 7 of those of the 17. But last year we got our HP 5-star Amplify Award for our print business, which shows both the social impact but also efforts to actually reduce carbon emissions across our client base. This year we achieved ISO 14001. So we put a big drive on, and we got signed off and accredited earlier in May, June this year. So we're absolutely delighted with this. We're now working with Clearstream, and as part of the EI funding, we're working with Clearstream and the team to define our Scope 1, Scope 2, and start looking at our Scope 3 emissions. Okay.
And has there been challenges that you found? Like, you've done a lot of things over the last kind of, couple of years. What are the challenges that you've encountered?
Yeah, I'd call out two, and in fact, I think Yvonne mentioned one at the start. The first one is where to start. Where do you start on your sustainability journey? Because there's an awful lot you can do, but there's no infinite pot of money that you can do it. So we looked at our own internal, a bit of introspection to start. We looked internally and started looking at our own carbon footprint again, and that's what we're redefining. And then we started looking at our supply chain, so Scope 3, upstream and downstream. That's a much bigger task. I think we'll get to that maybe at the end of this year. Second one I'd call out is data. So where do we get the data? And even so far this year, evidence is that we may have to change some of our own internal processes and practices and how we record data in order to be able to report as our customers and our own internal reporting demands. So data is key.
Okay, I think it's interesting there, because one of the things that you mentioned was around your buyers and your clients starting to ask for this more and more, and that's what we're finding so much from companies that are coming to do a Green Start or to get a climate action voucher. It's the push from their markets almost, and saying, if you want to be one of our client companies, if you want to supply into us, you need to start this, you need to have something in place, and that's often the motivation. Laura, I suppose Brian just talked there about some of the challenges. I mean, would you have any advice for companies starting out on this from your perspective?
Yeah, I definitely think there's been great advice mentioned today. My first piece of advice is just to start today, and you can do it step by step. Like, once you get going, you'll be really surprised at how quickly your action and to-do list starts to fill up. And the second one is get curious, because there's so much advice out there, like webinars like this. But I went off and did a course in the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. There's great podcasts like Climate Allies and Outrage and Optimism. Global Optimism was mentioned earlier. There's such amazing resources out there that you can get for free these days. And it's just a place where you can actually find allies. And that would be my third piece of advice is you can't do it alone. Like, we've talked about partnerships, it's one of the sustainability goals, but it's not just about that. It's having the courage to ask for help, and also planning how you're going to bring people along with you, because as we've discussed with the data challenge, and just generally with sustainability, you're always going to have to ask people to do something. So to bring people on that journey is really, really important. And I think that mindset of sharing, it's not only inviting people in, but it's also about like sharing within your industry. And there's a great comment by Paul Pullman, who is ex-CEO of Unilever, who says we don't have time to wait for individual companies to each go on their own sustainability journeys. So pull from the information that's out there and other companies that have been through or have just started themselves, and see what's working. And that'll help.
And you mentioned Climate Allies, and I've heard you speaking on that, your podcast episode on that, and I couldn't agree more. Be curious. There's so much resources out there. There's so much information. So find the thing that you like. Mine is podcasts, and then you'll be able to get so much more information about this area from that. Aina, just to ask, I suppose one of the things that BidX1 states is that it's carbon neutral. Would you be able to explain a little bit more about what that actually means for you as an organization?
Yeah, for us, well, carbon neutral, I suppose, is that the business has zero carbon impact for a period. For us, that has been about doing the assessment and quantifying how much carbon we have consumed, which was about 291 tons in our last assessment across all of our markets. And then we progressed and did carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting is about investing in a project that is about reducing carbon that has been consumed elsewhere. Our staff chose to invest in a safe water project in Rwanda, which is providing access to clean water instead of the traditional of cutting trees and burning trees, which was releasing carbon into the air. So for us, that's what we chose to carbon offset. But first and foremost, as a business, we're focused on reducing our own carbon impact first, and then offsetting the residual amount of carbon that we do have left as kind of a next step. And again, it's all about being transparent in that process. We have our webpage, BitX1 Carbon Neutral, which goes into what we have included in our carbon assessment, our Scope 1, Scope 2, and the majority of our Scope 3, and we're expanding that. And then how we got to where we are, what we're signing up to, so that we want to make clear, exactly where we are in that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned their transparency, and that's so important for companies to realize as they kind of start out on this, that transparency is key, and it's to get kind of comfortable with the idea of that and with what that will mean for your organization. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for sharing today, for sharing your experience and your insights. Laura, you mentioned something just there as we were on your last point around, that information piece and looking for resources, and it's worth just mentioning that there's a number of case studies of other companies that have done green starts, green pluses, that have gotten support from Enterprise Ireland, and they're all available on our website. So for anyone tuning in today that wants to see what other companies in the ICT and services sector, but also the food, engineering, construction sectors have done in relation to sustainability and climate action, please log on to Global Ambition to find out more. So thank you again, guys. If you could turn off your cameras and your microphones, I'm going to ask my colleague Kathleen O'Regan to come on and to speak about the Climate Enterprise Action Fund supports.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Joanne, there for the introduction. And look, really interesting morning with the panel discussion and our two keynote speakers earlier on. So I'm just going to give you an overview of the Climate Action Funding supports. So the objectives of the supports is to help companies to prepare for the low carbon, more resource efficient economy of the future, whether a company is starting out on their green journey or have already started. There are three main supports, and as mentioned earlier, the Climate Action Voucher, Green Start and Green Plus. So firstly, I'm just going to speak a little bit about the Climate Action Voucher, and this is our new support we launched recently there in April. So the Climate Action Voucher is a 100% funded grant to engage an expert or an advisor from the Enterprise Ireland Directory of Green Service Providers for 2 days. The Green Service Providers Directory can be downloaded from the Enterprise Ireland website. Total project cost is €1,800, and this equates to €900 per day. The voucher is open to eligible Enterprise Ireland and also UDEROS client companies. Local Enterprise Office client companies with employees or up to 10 employees can apply for a similar support called Green for Micro through their local Enterprise Office. Eligible projects under the Climate Action Voucher must include one of the following activities: resource efficiency assessment, renewable energy potential, introduction to corporate sustainability, or introduction to circular economy. So I'm just going to go into each of those in a little bit of detail. So under resource efficiency assessment, resources can include energy, water, materials. An example just of energy will include energy used for heating, lighting, operating equipment, refrigeration and transport. So a green service provider will identify resource, emissions and cost savings opportunities and will provide information then on the cost and the payback of those opportunities identified. Opportunities may be a mix of short and long-term opportunities, and they may vary from low or no cost to high cost opportunities. They can include capital projects. So for example, it could be to upgrade lighting to LED lighting. It will identify, what's the project going to cost and what are the emission and cost savings. So the second option then under the Climate Action Voucher is renewable energy potential. So the service provider will assess the business and site's energy usage and recommend the most appropriate renewable energy system for the business. And all renewable energy technologies can be considered, including solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, and biomass boilers. Similar to resource efficiency assessment, the service provider will identify resource, emissions, and cost savings opportunities and will provide information then on cost and payback of those opportunities identified. For example, the installation of solar panels. The third option is an introduction to corporate sustainability. The service provider will review the company's performance, activities and initiatives and provide advice on developing a policy and an initial action plan. And lastly then, introduction to circular economy, which means looking beyond the current take, make, waste linear economic model to a circular model that minimises waste and pollution by design and keeps products and materials in use and regenerates natural systems. So the service provider will help prepare a plan with the company to identify and develop circular economy ideas for a more circular product, process or service. More information on the application and claims process and eligible activities can be found on the Climate Action Voucher webpage and also the Climate Action Voucher assignment guidelines. As part of the application, you will need to supply resource usage information, such as you have them prior to your 2-day engagement. This will give the service provider information to work with before commencing the project and will ensure you get the most out of your 2-day engagement. The assignment is designed to be, the application form is designed to be easy to complete and has an expected turnaround and approval of a number of days. And it is expected that the assignment will be carried out within 6 weeks and that the outcomes will then start the company on a journey of activities. So next slide, please. So the second support is Green Start. Green Start project cost is €6,300 and the eligible cost element is the green service provider fee, which is 7 days at €900 per day. The grant is 80%, which equates to €5,000, and the assignment period is generally over 3 to 6 months. Green Start is available to eligible Enterprise Ireland, UDEROS, IDA and local enterprise office client companies. Companies can choose a service provider from the Directory of Green Service Providers. However, this is optional. Companies may select a service provider who is not on the directory and will be approved as part of the application process. Applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks. Under Green Start, a company can implement a basic management system based on Plan, Do, Check, Act, such as an environmental management system or an energy or carbon management system. Or a company can carry out a short-term project on a range of different activities from carbon or environmental footprinting to sustainable logistics to green procurement. A number of ICT and services companies have already availed of Green Start, including Thinkhouse, Videx, One and Ergo, who use Green Start to build their internal capabilities, to understand their baseline organisational environmental footprint and to help develop a strategy. So taking things to the next level then is Green Plus. So Green Plus project cost is up to €100,000 and the grant is up to 50%. The eligible cost elements include the green service provider fee, which is up to €900 per day, up to 10 project team member salary costs, and salary costs of up to €200 per day can be supported, and training course fees for specialised external courses that support the project goals. The assignment period is generally over 6 to 12 months, and Green Plus is available to Enterprise Ireland, UDEROS and IDA client companies. Similar to Green Start, the Directory of Green Service Providers is optional, and applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks. Eligible projects include training the company's green team to develop long-term sustainability plans and to align to internationally recognised standards, such as ISO 14001, which is the International Standard for Environmental Management, or ISO 50001, the Energy Management Standard, or to align to frameworks or disclosure platforms, such as the Science Based Targets Initiative, SME Client Hub, CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, or TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. For more information on the 3 supports, go to globalambition.ie/climate action, and you will see assignment guidelines for each support, the Climate Action Voucher, Green Start and Green Plus. The guidelines outline the application and claims process and the eligible activities in more detail. And we strongly encourage you to talk to your development advisor to understand how the green supports can help your company on its green journey. The supports are there to help you get external expertise, to build in-house capabilities, whether you're starting on your green transformation journey or have already started. And as we've heard from all the participants here today, green credentials are becoming more and more important for all stakeholders, from consumers to supply chains to banks, investors, regulators, and to employees. So back to you, Joanne.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. So I'm going to ask the panelists to put back on their microphones and their cameras, and we'll just go through a couple of questions that have come through. Great. So actually, Kathleen, I'm going to start with you. So how does a company know what EI support is best for them? What's the best? How do they decide the best options starting out?
So a company doesn't have to start with a climate action voucher and move to a Green Start or Green Plus. So it really depends on the company. So if, for example, a business is under supply chain pressure and has been mentioned here to align to an international standard, or the resource use justified implementing a national standard, then Green Plus would be the better option there, because it can take up to 6 months or perhaps longer, depending on where you're at now as a business, to actually implement that standard and to get to train your project team. Or if you already have standards in place and you're looking to train more employees across your organization in areas like, life cycle assessment, green procurement, that the Green Plus is a training grant. But if, for example, you are, starting out and you've never done an energy audit, or you've never looked at, your resource use, then the climate action voucher is probably the best place to start. As a service provider, we'll work with you then to identify, that register of opportunities. And as Laura mentioned, that you can quickly develop a list of things to do. So to make that start with the climate action voucher, whether it's the resource efficiency assessment or helping you with your strategy, and then potentially move on to a Green Start. And Green Start, a lot of companies have used Green Start to implement a management system, but perhaps not to the ISO standard. So it depends on the company. If they do want to go for an international framework, we would definitely recommend Green Plus. But if you want to implement and benefit from having a standard in place, Green Start might be more appropriate.
Great, okay. Laura, quick one for you. What are the big challenges emerging for communication professionals and advertisers now in the context of sustainability and climate action?
I think it's really interesting because more and more the advertising and marketing sector is being targeted as an industry. I think we were like the second industry targeted by Extinction Rebellion after the fossil fuel industry, because they were basically saying, like, you are an industry that's been driving consumption, and you can make a difference with the skills that you have, with the communication skills that you have. So globally, I think it's 95% of marketers say that their department can make a difference when it comes to sustainability, but actually only 10% claim to be well advanced on their sustainability journey. So there is this gap. And then while we're seeing, this increased demand from brands, from our clients to really advertise, sustainability credentials, there's a challenge because at the moment, marketing departments and sustainability departments are quite separate. So there's real importance to upskill and to engage different people that you wouldn't normally have engaged before. So I think what's fascinating for me is that moral perspective, and also this kind of really transformative energy that's happening at the moment really fast. So there's groups like, I'm involved in Purpose Disruptors Ireland, who are bringing people together from across the industry that used to be competitors, but actually are now kind of turning into allies and really learning how, having been complicit and been a part of the problem, can we use our skills that we now see and understand as really essential to the solution to use our creative comms to promote sustainable behaviors and overcome the challenges that exist in language and in imagery at the moment in sustainability comms, and really make the future we need more aspirational and bring that closer to home. So loads going on in terms of comms in this space, but it's really, really fascinating to see how, the processes just generally are starting to change up, and there's different people involved in the conversations all the time.
I think that, piece around groups and organizations and companies within the same sectors coming together to try and figure this out is so important, but it's completely new territory. It requires kind of a change in thinking from this competitive piece to actually, in order for us to have an actual impact, we need to kind of put our heads together around this. I'm conscious of time, but I do just have a brief question for Aina and Brian, maybe around, I suppose, how do you bring all employees on this journey with you? How did you get good buy-in from colleagues and from people within your organizations around sustainability and the plans for the company's future? Aina, maybe if I start with you.
Absolutely. I think getting buy-in has not been difficult at all. Once we started talking about this, the enthusiasm that was already in all staff in the business it's been more about harnessing it than trying to get buy-in. what we kind of got the information out there that we were doing the carbon assessment, including people to submit their commuting habits as part of the assessment, getting them involved in choosing the project we invested in for the carbon offsetting. But then it's kind of a piece that Laura mentioned. It was having on the sustainability team people from each department, each business function, each country on that team. So the information is getting to everybody, and that team can get the information down to all staff and in their departments, but also all staff in those departments can get the information directly back to the team by someone who's local to them, as opposed to this other third-party sustainability team. It's kind of been a big part of what's been, I suppose, a success in our sustainability team.
And Brian, did you find kind of something similar?
Actually, Aina and Laura summed it up. So I guess this is one area where we collectively are all working towards the same goal. Mm-hmm. So getting people involved, getting them to sign up. We've done it in Ergo, same as Aina's done, multiple departments all joining a fortnightly program call focused on sustainability. And whether it's going out and doing a beach clean, which we did earlier in June, or whether it's focusing on our carbon footprint, now we reduce that. Everybody is working towards the same thing. There's no competition. It's all focused on the same goal.
Well, I'd certainly love if somebody turned around to me and said, would you participate in a beach clean this afternoon? I think it's absolutely the day for it. Listen, thank you all so much for joining us. So we'll finish up now. If you want to pop off your cameras and your microphones. That's great. So yeah, again, just to say thank you to everyone, to our panelists, to our keynote speakers, and to my colleague Kathleen for their participation today. And thanks to everybody who tuned in online. And I suppose it's just to mention, to find out more about the Climate Enterprise Action Fund supports, please log on to globalambition.ie/climate-action. And yeah, hopefully we'll be hearing from a lot of the people that have tuned in today in relation to the Climate Action Voucher, to Green Start, or to Green Plus in the future. So thank you again, and goodbye.